The psychology nobody taught you, the one that speaks of archetypes, myths, and soul, shows that sadness isn't weakness. It's Hades knocking on the door of your consciousness, calling you to descend. And no, it's not to punish you, it's to reveal you. That pain you feel, the heaviness, the emptiness, the silence inside, can be much more than an emotional imbalance. It might be Hades knocking at the door of your soul. And in this video, you'll discover why so many people collapse without even knowing they're going through an initiation. You'll understand why running from pain is like running from the only key that can open what you're really after, the meaning of your life. So take a deep breath. Because if you're feeling lost, you might just be beginning to find yourself. Have you ever felt like you were sinking from the inside, but didn't know exactly why? Like something invisible was pulling you down into a dark, silent, almost subterranean place? That force dragging you with no explanation, that weight nobody sees, could very well be Hades knocking on your door. And no, it isn't just a metaphor. According to James Hillman, every deep emotion is an archetypal call. And sadness, that dense existential sadness, is the clearest sign that your psyche is asking you to go down. The problem is, we've been taught to see it as disease, as weakness. But what if it were a sacred passage? What if that sinking was actually the first step of your rebirth? In archetypal psychology, the soul is seen as a mythological theater. And when sadness hits intensely, Hades, the god of the invisible, the ruler of the psychic underworld, takes center stage. It's not punishment, it's ritual. Hillman said the psyche doesn't want to be saved. It wants to be deepened. When you feel empty, lifeless, it's because your soul is tired of living on the surface. That sadness doesn't come from a wounded ego. It comes from a wounded self. And Hades, with his dark cloak and absolute silence, has arrived to guide you toward the most forgotten part of your inner truth. But most people run away. They take pills, they pretend everything's fine, and what could have been initiation turns into exhaustion. You know that feeling of being present but absent, laughing, yet holding back tears in your chest? That's not drama. It's an archetypal symptom. Hillman teaches that deep sadness isn't a problem to fix. It's a living myth unfolding inside the soul. And in that myth, you're the main character. The issue is nobody told you sadness has a function, that emptiness has a voice, that the plunge hurts but reveals. By ignoring this call, you interrupt a process that could be transformative. And the archetype of Hades, when rejected, becomes shadow. And the shadow, as Jung said, doesn't forgive those who deny it. See, the soul's underworld isn't a place of punishment. It's a place of depth. But to get there, you'll have to lose your distractions. You'll have to drown out the world's noise to hear the whisper of what's been forgotten. That might happen during grief, a breakup, or a Sunday when everything looks colorless. It's in those moments that Hades rings the bell of consciousness, and you feel like isolating yourself, retreating, disappearing. But that isn't escape. It's descent. It's the beginning of meeting your true self when no one's watching. Want an example? When someone loses a job and feels like their world's collapsed, sometimes it isn't the position they miss. It's the ground. Sadness isn't for what's gone. It's for what's trying to emerge. And that kind of pain isn't solved with ready-made phrases. It's solved with courage, like keeping a journal of the questions that hurt, silencing your phone for a day, or drawing what you feel, even if you think it's ugly. The soul speaks in images, and every sadness has a face. Denying it is like covering a mirror with a dark cloth, but facing it is a step too bold for most. Except you're not most people. And it's right in that moment when everything seems dark that you start to realize the emptiness you fear isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to cleanse you. Because before any rebirth, you have to die a little. Die to who you thought you were. Die to the noise, to control, to the mask. But that only reveals itself when you accept the descent. And when you descend, it's Hades who greets you. In Greek mythology, Hades is lord of the underworld, the invisible, the hidden, the place nobody wants to go, but where everything essential hides. In Hillman's archetypal psychology, Hades isn't just a mythic figure. He's a state of soul, a psychic atmosphere that settles in when we're ready, or forced, to face the parts we left in shadow. And here's a crucial point. Hades isn't the villain of the story, he's the guardian, the caretaker of what was forgotten. Deep sadness, the kind that paralyzes and silences, usually bears his signature. When you feel like you can't live the same way anymore, it's because Hades has already arrived. And he doesn't come through the front door, you know? Hades doesn't shout, demand, or impose himself. He creeps in through the side of consciousness, like a mood. Suddenly, everything seems grayer. You feel alive, but not present. It's like something drags you inward, unplugging you from the outside world. Then the symptoms start. Introspection, existential boredom, apathy. But behind it all lies hidden wisdom. Hades doesn't lead you down for nothing. He's inviting you to descend the steps of the unconscious, where you can finally look into the eyes of everything you avoided your whole life. That's why Hillman said sadness has geography, and that geography is vertical. It points down, to the depths, to the dark, but not to punish you, to show you. The underworld isn't a bottomless pit. It's a hidden sanctuary within you. There dwell the feelings you rejected, the desires you never lived, the memories you've buried. Everything you considered inadequate or dangerous is stored there. And what does Hades do? He turns the key. He opens the door. But only those who choose to walk in the dark without a flashlight enter. Modern superficial culture calls this a crisis, but the soul calls it descent, initiation, a symbolic journey. The ancients knew this. In rites of passage, they often simulated a symbolic death, a time of silence, solitude, and withdrawal. Today, we just call it feeling down. We grab a coffee, post a pretty quote on Instagram, and try to move on, but the soul doesn't move on. It waits. It waits for you to understand that discomfort isn't just pain. It's a guide, a path, the entrance to a new chapter of your existence. And the key is your courage. Want a practical example? People who rediscover themselves after burnout, or after a traumatic breakup, or even through a depression that seemed unbearable, but later revealed itself as the start of a more authentic life. Those people, unknowingly, were led by Hades. Deep down, they weren't lost. They were being guided to a point of return. But that journey isn't always understood rationally. That's why the archetype helps. It gives emotion an image. It gives chaos a story. It turns anguish into narrative. And where there's narrative, there's meaning. That's how Hades works. As an initiator, he doesn't want you to die. He wants you to see with new eyes. And what he guards in the underworld isn't eternal suffering, but revelations. When you accept this journey, you realize you were carrying more weight than you should have. Masks, expectations, old stories, and what looked like mere sadness was a calling. But this call, if ignored, can become a prison. So the moment to look within can't be delayed, because down there, only there, you find the key to what needs to bloom. And that's when sadness starts to change shape. It's strange how we learn to be ashamed of our own sadness, just cry a little more than acceptable. And someone asks, "Are you okay?" As if it's not okay not to be okay. Sadness has become a sign of imbalance, when in fact, it's a bridge between who you are and who you're becoming. In many cultures of old, those in mourning weren't isolated out of exclusion, but out of respect. They were in transition. Today, any pain becomes pathology, but not all pain needs to be cured. Some pains need to be felt to the end. James Hillman insisted on this. The soul doesn't want quick fixes. It wants depth. Sadness is one of the only emotional states that forces us to stop, to leave autopilot, to touch what matters. And that's exactly why it's so maligned in a society obsessed with productivity and performance, because it forces us to slow down, to drop the mask of everything's fine. But pay attention. That pause and feel movement is an initiation rite. It's like the soul saying, to be born again, you've got to die a little first. Have you noticed how sadness distorts time? How days stretch, hours drag, and everything feels denser? That time is kairos, the soul's time. Unlike chronos, clock time, kairos can't be controlled. It has its own rhythm, and when you enter that state, you must respect that internal time. Maybe by listening to music that moves you deeply, writing in a journal what you can't say aloud, or simply staring at the ceiling in silence. All of that is part of the ritual, part of the crossing. And yes, it might seem like nothing's happening, but it is. Beneath the surface, something's shifting. Like a forest in winter. On the outside, it looks dead, but inside, the roots are thriving. Sadness is your inner winter. It gathers, silences, prunes, and only those who honor that silence harvest the spring that follows. Trying to skip it is like pulling a seed from the earth to see if it's sprouting. The soul has its seasons, and sadness is one of them. One of the most fertile, in fact. But to be so, it must be lived, not wiped away. And when we run away, as almost everyone does, what happens? The pain returns in another form. It becomes anxiety, insomnia, compulsion. It's like the soul saying, if you won't listen to my whisper, I'll scream. And the scream, sadly, sometimes only comes when we break, when we lose someone, when we're fired, when we can't pretend anymore. But that too is part of the rite, because there's no crossing without unraveling, no healing without collapse, no transformation without pain. What exists is a choice to go through it consciously, or be dragged along. And it's precisely in that choice, whether you face it or flee, that the journey changes tone. When you realize sadness didn't come to paralyze you, but to prepare you, everything shifts. It's as if, amid chaos, a part of you whispers, wait, this has a purpose. And that's when emptiness begins to show its real role, because, yes, there's something precious hidden in the void. But to see it, you'll first have to face the dark with eyes wide open. Most people dread the void, and it's no accident. The void is the only place with no distractions, no applause, no escape. It leaves you alone with yourself. But contrary to belief, the void isn't the end, it's the portal. A fertile ground where everything can be reborn, but where nothing blossoms without silence. When you feel you've lost your footing, nothing fills you anymore. Even joys seem colorless. It's a sign your ego is losing strength, and it's the self that starts to speak. But the self, unlike the ego, whispers, and only in the void can it be heard. Jung said it's in the collapse of the persona that the self begins to emerge, and that's exactly what the void does. It dismantles the image you've built of yourself. It shatters certainties, breaks disguises. It's like an internal blackout. Scary? Yes, but necessary. Because as long as you identify with the roles you've learned to play, the exemplary child, the successful professional, the strong one in the family, you won't access your essence. The void arrives when those masks fall. And deep down, that's what you've been missing. Yourself. You know that sense that everything's lost meaning? It's a sign the old no longer serves, but the new hasn't arrived yet. That's the void's limbo, a space between worlds. And if you hold on, you'll emerge different, more whole, more real. The problem is most people try to flee it too soon. They get into new relationships, take on new projects, move cities. But the void isn't geographical. It follows you until you listen. And what's it trying to say? That maybe it's time to change not the setting but the protagonist. A simple yet powerful exercise for anyone in this state. Every day, write for 5 minutes a question to your void. It might feel weird at first, but over time you'll start noticing subtle answers, ideas that spring from nowhere, dreams with hidden meanings, intuitions that touch you differently. That's not random, it's the soul trying to speak. And it only finds space when the mind stops shouting. The void doesn't need filling, it needs honoring. And in that process, something beautiful begins. You stop searching outside what can only be found within. The search for meaning becomes quieter, deeper, more intimate. You start to see emotional chaos, not as a mess, but as reconstruction. Silence isn't absence, it's presence. And the void isn't punishment, it's invitation. An invitation to listen, to embrace, to finally let go of everything that was excess. And it's when that excess disappears that something new approaches. From the depths, something only Hades could show you. And then the lesson reveals itself. What you thought was the end was preparation. The void pulled you down, yes. But down there you found what the surface never showed you. And in that darkness you weren't alone. Hades was there. And with him, a key. The key to the profound. Many believe suffering is a mistake, a sign something's gone terribly wrong. But what if it's just the opposite? What if it's in pain that the greatest clarity lives? Hades, the lord of the invisible, doesn't carry gold in his hands. He guards treasures in the dark, and only those who accept the descent, who dare the dive, discover it. Hillman said the soul doesn't develop by going up, but by going down. And when you dive into the depths, into what bothers you, into what confronts you, you find beauty there too. Not the beauty of the surface, but the beauty of the essential, of what was hidden but never stopped being you. There's a beautiful myth about this, the story of Persephone. Kidnapped by Hades, she descends to the underworld against her will, but over time she stops being a victim and becomes queen. Down there, she discovers her strength, her voice, her purpose, and that's what deep pain does. At first, you feel kidnapped by life, but if you stay, you begin to see that suffering hides wisdom. It's a silent initiation. Every tear becomes symbol. Every silence, an altar. Every dark day, a door that opens only for those brave enough to remain. Sadness isn't just emotion, it's a map that leads straight to the soul's core, but beware, that map has no visible arrows. It reveals itself in metaphors, symbols, dreams, and that's where the archetype becomes essential. When you realize you're living a living myth, like Persephone, like Inanna, like Orpheus, your pain gains meaning. It becomes a journey, and once it's a journey, it stops feeling like punishment. That's why many say, after a collapse, it was the worst time of my life, but also the most revealing. That's no coincidence. That's Hades doing his work. Looking within is like diving into the sea at night. You can't see the bottom, but you feel something calling you. And the deeper you go, the quieter it gets. But it's down there, in the depths, that pearls form, not on the restless surface. And your soul is full of pearls waiting for you. But nobody finds a pearl without the courage to open the shell. And sometimes that shell is pain. What seemed like mere emotional weight might actually be the shell holding the rarest essence of your being. Want a practical way to access that deep value? Write a letter as if your sadness were speaking to you. What would it say? What is it trying to show you? Don't rationalize. Let it come. It might take the form of poetry, a scream, a prayer. The soul doesn't demand perfect form. It demands truth. And when you start giving shape to what you feel, you'll notice something magical. Sadness begins to transform. As if, once named, it changes its density from silent enemy to discreet teacher. And then at the end of the dive, you realize it wasn't about resisting. It was about accepting. It wasn't about fleeing pain. It was about understanding what it wanted to reveal. Hades didn't come to punish you. He came to give you a key. And that key opens a door many spend their lives trying to find. an internal subtle door that only appears to those brave enough not to close their eyes in the dark. And when that door opens, something changes, something returns, something comes back from the underworld. But that is only for those who choose to return different. It's not enough to descend. Many dive into their own pain, but get lost down there. The true crossing happens when you manage to return and return with something. Not to be who you were before, but to be who you never knew. When the soul descends to the underworld, it doesn't seek ready-made answers. It seeks symbols, intuitions, meanings. And the return isn't like hitting a reset button. It's a reintegration, a new stitching together of what you discovered down there with the life that goes on out here. Hades gives you a gift, but you need to know what to do with it. That gift is often raw self-knowledge, unembellished. You realize, for example, you spent years living to please others, or that your relationship had been emotionally dead for a long time, or that the career path you chose was more about validation than vocation. Those realizations aren't easy, but they're liberating. It's like finding fragments of yourself scattered at the bottom of a dark lake and gathering them one by one, even with trembling fingers. That's the real return, not just rising, but coming back with something that has soul value. But how to do this in practice? One of the most effective ways is symbolic expression. Pain needs to become image, sound, writing, movement. Sadness, when given form, becomes language, and that language heals. Write, draw, dance, scream, pray. The medium doesn't matter, the contact does. Hillman insisted that the imagination is the soul's true soil, and when you give shape to pain, it transforms, becomes bridge, becomes ritual, becomes art. And your pain, once silent and dense, starts dissolving into something that can be shared and understood. Some people come back from the underworld with a book, others with a song, others with a different look at their child, a different calm in chaos, a presence you can't buy, learn in a course, or fake. It's the presence of someone who's gone to the depths and survived. That presence is rare, and those who carry it also carry a responsibility not to forget, because the memory of pain is what keeps the soul awake, and an awakened soul is what sustains a life of truth. Maybe that's why so many feel they were never the same after a great sorrow. And it's okay not to be the same. Actually, it'd be strange if you were, because after you see what you saw, feel what you felt, understand what you understood, you can't go back to autopilot, and that's a blessing disguised as collapse. Healing that feels like crisis, rebirth that smells like morning. But for those who truly live, it's gold, it's soul, it's the kind of wealth no one gives, no one sells, and no one takes away. And when you understand all that, you realize sadness wasn't the problem. It was the messenger, the knock on the door. It was Hades saying, there's something down here you need to see. Oh, and now that you've seen it, what will you do with it? So tell me, what are you going to do with everything you've discovered today? Will you keep treating your sadness as a mistake? Or will you start listening to it as the call it is? Because the truth is, so many spend their lives avoiding pain and never realize they're fleeing themselves. Maybe you don't need fixing. Maybe you just need courage. Courage to descend, to look, to come back with something true. So tell me, have you ever had an experience where you felt pain transformed you? Have you ever been to the bottom and returned different? Write it in the comments. I read them all and would love to hear about your journey. And if you want to keep exploring the mysteries of mind, soul, and consciousness, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because this was just the first door. There's so much more to open.